The vacuum hummed against the mahogany floors as I worked my way around Mr. Thornton's study. 7 years I'd been cleaning this mansion, and I still couldn't get used to how much space one man needed. 42 rooms for a single person. I'd counted them all during my first month, back when everything still intimidated me. The vacuum shut off with a click, and the silence of the mansion settled back in around me. I checked my watch. 4:30. If I hurried, I could finish the library before Mr. Thornton returned from his business trip. I always saved the library for last. Something about the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound first editions made me feel small in a way that was comforting rather than diminishing. It was my favorite room in the house, though I'd never admit that to anyone. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Mom. Again. I let it go to voicemail. Ever since I'd started working for Mr. Thornton, her calls followed the same pattern. First asking about my health, then about how my job search was going, as if cleaning this mansion was just a temporary setback before my real life began. "When are you going to find a dignified job, Maria?" she'd ask every Sunday dinner, cutting into her pot roast with surgical precision. "You have a business degree. You're meant for better things than scrubbing someone else's toilets." I never told her how much Mr. Thornton paid me. Triple the going rate, with full benefits and a private apartment above the garage that would cost me half my monthly salary anywhere else in the city. I never told her that some days, when he was working from home, Mr. Thornton would invite me to have lunch with him on the terrace, asking my opinion about everything, from politics to philosophy, to which ties matched which suits. I never told her because I knew it wouldn't matter. To her, housekeeping wasn't a real job. It was what immigrants did when they first came to America, before they found their place, before they became respectable. I gathered my cleaning supplies and headed toward the library, my shoes silent against the polished floor. As I rounded the corner, I nearly collided with Mrs. Winters, the house manager. She rarely spoke to me directly, preferring to leave detailed notes about special cleaning requests or schedule changes. "Maria," she said, her voice clipped as always. "Mr. Thornton is returning this evening, earlier than expected. He asked me to inform you that he would like you to be available tonight." I blinked, unsure I'd heard correctly. "Available? For cleaning?" "For dinner," she said, her expression unchanged. "He'll pick you up at 7. Dress appropriately." With that, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the floor like a metronome. I stood frozen, my cleaning caddy hanging heavily from my hand. In 7 years, Mr. Thornton had never once asked me to join him for dinner outside the house. Our conversations had always been confined to the mansion's walls, as if crossing that threshold would somehow change the nature of our relationship, from employer-employee to something undefined and therefore dangerous. By 6:30, I'd tried on every nice outfit I owned, which wasn't saying much. I finally settled on a simple black dress I'd bought for a cousin's wedding 3 years ago. It was conservative enough to be appropriate, but nice enough that I wouldn't embarrass myself or Mr. Thornton. At precisely 7 o'clock, the intercom by my door buzzed. Not Mrs. Winters or one of the drivers, but Mr. Thornton himself, standing beside his vintage Bentley in the courtyard below. I grabbed my purse and coat, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Good evening, Maria," he said as I approached the car. His voice was warm but tired. At 78, Malcolm Thornton was still an imposing figure, tall and straight back with a full head of silver hair and eyes the color of polished steel. "Thank you for agreeing to join me on such short notice." "Of course, Mr. Thornton," I said, trying to sound casual, as if being picked up by my billionaire employer was an everyday occurrence. He opened the passenger door for me, a gesture that felt both chivalrous and strangely intimate. As he walked around to the driver's side, I noticed he was moving more slowly than usual, his normally fluid gait slightly stiff. "You're driving yourself tonight?" I asked as he settled into the driver's seat. Mr. Thornton usually had a driver take him everywhere. "Some conversations are best had in private," he said, starting the engine. We drove in silence for several minutes, the Bentley purring through the evening traffic. I waited for him to explain why he'd invited me to dinner, but he seemed content to focus on the road, occasionally glancing at me as if confirming I was still there. Finally, I couldn't bear the suspense anymore. "Is everything all right, Mr. Thornton?" His hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "I received some news in New York," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Medical news." My stomach dropped. "Are you ill?" "Terminal pancreatic cancer," he said, as matter of fact as if he were discussing the weather. 6 months, maybe 8, with aggressive treatment. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Mr. Thornton had always seemed indestructible to me, a force of nature rather than a mortal man. The idea of him dying was like imagining the sun deciding not to rise. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, the words entirely inadequate. "Don't be," he said, turning onto a quiet side street lined with exclusive restaurants. He pulled up to the valley stand of an elegant restaurant I'd only read about in magazines. "But I find myself with some unfinished business. That's where you come in." As the valet opened my door, I felt disoriented, as if I'd stepped into someone else's life. The maitre d' greeted Mr. Thornton by name and led us to a private dining room in the back where a table was set for 2 beside a window overlooking a small garden. A bottle of champagne waited in an ice bucket. Once we were seated and the champagne poured, Mr. Thornton looked at me directly for the first time that evening. "Do you know why I hired you, Maria?" The question caught me off guard. "Because Mrs. Regaria recommended me. She said you needed someone reliable after your last housekeeper retired." He smiled slightly. "Partly, but I receive dozens of recommendations every month. I chose you because of your business degree." I stared at him. "You knew about that?" "I know everything about the people who work for me. Rutgers Business School, 3.8 GPA, graduated with honors despite working 2 jobs. Turned down an entry-level position at Morgan Stanley to care for your father after his stroke." Heat crept up my neck. I'd never told anyone at the mansion about my father or why I'd started cleaning houses instead of pursuing a career in finance. "Your father passed away 4 years ago," Mr. Thornton continued, "yet you continued working as my housekeeper. I've often wondered why." I looked down at my untouched champagne. The job market had changed, and I hesitated, unwilling to admit the truth. "And you found some comfort in the routine," he finished for me, "in taking care of something tangible when everything else felt out of control." I looked up, startled by his perception. "Yes." He nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "I've watched you, Maria. The way you manage the house, the way you organize everything so efficiently, the way you've handled the other staff when Mrs. Winters was ill last year. You have a gift for management that goes beyond cleaning." The waiter arrived with our appetizers, momentarily interrupting the conversation. When he left, Mr. Thornton leaned forward. "I've made many changes to my will over the past few days," he said, his voice lower now. "Most of my estate will go to various charitable foundations. My children will receive their trusts, of course, though God knows they don't need more money." I nodded, uncertain why he was telling me this. "But there are aspects of my legacy that require more personal attention." He reached into his jacket and removed a folded document, which he placed on the table between us. "I've left you the house, Maria, and $20 million to maintain it." The champagne flute slipped from my fingers, crystals shattering against the hardwood floor. A waiter materialized instantly, cleaning up the mess while I sat frozen, unable to process what Mr. Thornton had just said. "I don't understand," I finally managed, my voice barely audible. "It's quite simple," Mr. Thornton replied, seemingly unfazed by my reaction. "The mansion and $20 million will be yours upon my death. There are conditions, of course." The waiter finished cleaning and discreetly replaced my champagne glass. I didn't touch it. "Why me?" I asked, the only question that mattered. Mr. Thornton's steel gray eyes held mine. Because you love that house in a way my children never have. Because you understand its value beyond its price tag." He paused, taking a sip of his champagne. "And because I believe you're capable of much more than you've allowed yourself to be." My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Your children—" "My children have their own homes," he interrupted. "Homes they've chosen. The mansion was never a home to them, only a symbol of my success and their privilege." His expression softened slightly. "They were raised by nannies in that house while I built my empire. They associated with absence, not family." I thought of Mr. Thornton's 3 children, whom I'd met only a handful of times over the years. Elizabeth, the oldest, lived in Europe with her 3rd husband. Michael ran the West Coast division of Thornton Industries from Los Angeles, and Catherine was a renowned neurosurgeon in Boston. None of them visited more than once or twice a year. "They'll contest the will," I said, the practical side of my business education kicking in. "They might try," he conceded. "But I've taken precautions. The document is ironclad, drawn up by the best estate attorneys in New York." He tapped the folder between us. "Besides, the bulk of my fortune, nearly $4 billion, will still be divided among them. The mansion and $20 million is a drop in that bucket." $4 billion. The number was so large it lost all meaning. I'd known Mr. Thornton was wealthy, of course. The mansion alone was worth at least $30 million, but I'd never allowed myself to contemplate the full extent of his fortune. "There are conditions," he reminded me, pushing the folder toward me. "Open it." With shaking hands, I lifted the cover. Inside was a detailed document outlining the terms of my inheritance. The mansion would become a museum and cultural center, open to the public 3 days a week. The art collection, which included original works by Picasso, Monet, and Degas, would remain in place. I would live in the East Wing and manage the entire operation, with the $20 million serving as both an endowment for the museum and a trust for my personal expenses. "You want me to turn your home into a museum?" I asked, looking up from the document. "You want me to preserve my legacy," he corrected. "The artwork, the architecture, the gardens, all of it deserves to be shared, not hidden away or sold off piece by piece, which is precisely what would happen if my children inherited the property." I continued reading, my business mind automatically analyzing the proposal. It was comprehensive, covering everything from staffing to tax implications to educational programs. The plan would transform the mansion from a private residence to a public institution, while preserving its character and contents. "You've been planning this for some time," I said, recognizing that this level of detail couldn't have been developed in just a few days. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I've been planning this for 3 years, since the day I found you in the library reading a first edition of The Great Gatsby when you thought the house was empty." Heat flooded my face. I remembered that day clearly. I'd been dusting the library shelves when I'd spotted the book. I knew I shouldn't have touched it, but the temptation had been too great. I'd only intended to look at it for a minute, but had become so engrossed that I'd sat down in Mr. Thornton's leather chair, losing track of time. "You weren't supposed to be home until evening," I said weakly. "My meeting ended early. I came into the library and found you so completely absorbed that you didn't even notice me. When I saw how carefully you held that book, like it was something precious rather than valuable, I knew you were different." I remember closing the book guiltily when I'd finally noticed him standing in the doorway, stammering apologies as I returned it to its shelf. I'd been certain I would be fired on the spot. Instead, he'd asked me what I thought of Fitzgerald's portrayal of the American dream. We'd ended up discussing literature for over an hour. "That doesn't explain why you'd leave me your home," I said. "Doesn't it?" His expression was kind, but challenging. "Maria, in 7 years, I've watched you treat my home with more respect and care than anyone else ever has, including me. You don't just clean the mansion, you preserve it. You notice when the walnut paneling in the study needs oil.
You turn the pages of the books periodically so the sunlight doesn't damage them in the same spots. You rotate the Persian rugs to ensure even wear. I hadn't realized he'd noticed these things. They were just part of my job, part of caring for something beautiful. More importantly, he continued, you understand that houses like mine are more than just displays of wealth. They're repositories of history and art and craftsmanship. They deserve to be maintained, not just for their owners, but for future generations. Our main courses arrived, though I couldn't imagine eating. Mr. Thornton, however, began cutting into his steak as if we were discussing nothing more consequential than the weather. You don't have to decide tonight, he said after a few bites. Take the folder home, read through everything, ask questions, consider what it would mean for your life. I nodded, grateful for the reprieve. My mind was still struggling to process everything. The inheritance, the museum, the implication that Mr. Thornton had been quietly evaluating me for years, seeing potential in me that I'd stopped seeing in myself. May I ask you something personal? I said, finally picking up my fork, though I had no appetite. Of course. After my father died, why didn't you ever suggest I look for another job, one that used my degree? He considered the question, dabbing his mouth with a napkin. Because I recognize that you were healing. Some wounds need time and space and routine to mend properly. He set down his napkin. And selfishly, I enjoyed having someone in the house who appreciated it as I did, someone who saw beyond its monetary value to its soul. I thought about the countless hours I'd spent in that mansion, learning its rhythms and secrets, the way the light hit the stained glass in the morning room at sunrise, the slight creak in the third step of the back staircase, the hidden panel in the library that concealed a small reading nook where, I suspect, Mr. Thornton escaped when he wanted to avoid his business associates. It would be a significant responsibility, Mr. Thornton said, interrupting my thoughts. Managing a museum, preserving a historical property, dealing with the public. Very different from what you do now. It would be a real job, I said, thinking of my mother. A dignified one. Something in my tone must have given me away because Mr. Thornton's eyebrow raised slightly. Ah, your mother doesn't approve of your current position. I shook my head, embarrassed. She thinks I'm wasting my education, that I could be doing something more. And what do you think, Maria? The question hung between us. What did I think? I'd spent so many years prioritizing others' needs and expectations, my father's care, my mother's approval, Mr. Thornton's standards, that I'd almost forgotten how to answer such a question for myself. I think, I began slowly, that there is dignity in any job done well, in caring for beautiful things, in preserving what others have created. I met his gaze. But I also think I'm capable of more than just cleaning, of building something, not just maintaining it. He smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed his usually austere face. That's exactly what I hoped you'd say.
The drive back to the mansion was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. The folder sat heavy on my lap, containing a future I'd never imagined for myself. When we reached the gates, Mr. Thornton bypassed the main driveway that would have taken us to my apartment above the garage, instead following the circular drive to the front entrance. "Walk with me," he said as the car came to a stop. "I want to show you something." The mansion was eerily quiet at night, most of the staff having gone home hours ago. Our footsteps echoed on the marble floor of the grand foyer as Mr. Thornton led me past rooms I cleaned daily, but had never seen in this light. Shadowed and mysterious, the antique furniture creating strange silhouettes in the darkness. "I bought this house when I was 32, Mr. Thornton said as we walked. It was in terrible condition. The previous owners had neglected it for decades. Most people thought I should tear it down and build something modern." We passed through the formal dining room with its hand-painted ceiling mural, the music room with its Steinway grand piano, the solarium filled with exotic plants I watered each morning. "But I saw its potential," he continued.
I spent 3 years restoring it, sourcing period-appropriate materials, finding craftsmen who still knew how to work with plaster and gold leaf and hand-carved woodwork. Everyone thought I was wasting my money. We reached the library, and he pushed open the heavy double doors. Unlike the other rooms, a small lamp burned on the desk, casting a warm glow over the space. Mr. Thornton crossed to a painting on the far wall, a landscape I dusted countless times, and swung it aside to reveal a wall safe. I watched as he entered a combination, the safe door opening with a soft click. From inside, he removed a leather-bound book and brought it to the desk, gesturing for me to join him. "This is the original architect's journal," he said, carefully opening the fragile volume. "Charles Barrett designed this house in 1891 for the Whitman family. It contains all his notes, sketches, and observations during the construction process." I leaned closer, marveling at the detailed drawings and elegant handwriting. The pages were filled with architectural plans, material specifications, and personal reflections on the challenges and triumphs of building such an ambitious structure. "I've never shown this to anyone," Mr. Thornton said quietly. "Not my children, not my late wife, not even the Historical Society that's been begging to digitize it for their archives." I looked up at him, understanding the significance of this moment. "Why are you showing it to me?" "Because you need to understand what you'd be preserving." He turned a page, revealing a sketch of the library where we now stood. "Charles Barrett designed this house as an art itself, a living, breathing space designed to inspire and elevate everyone who entered it." He continued turning pages, showing me details I'd never noticed despite years of cleaning every inch of the house. Hidden symbols carved into the woodwork, mathematical proportions that governed the dimensions of each room, secret passages that connected different parts of the house. The museum you would create wouldn't just be about displaying wealth or artwork. It would be about honoring the vision and craftsmanship that went into creating this place, about ensuring that future generations can experience what true artisanship looks like. As he spoke, I began to see the mansion through new eyes, not as a workplace or even as a beautiful home, but as a cultural artifact, a piece of history that deserved preservation. "There's something else you should know," Mr. Thornton said, closing the journal carefully. "The board of Thornton Industries wanted me to sell this property years ago, convert it to a corporate retreat or a luxury hotel. From a business perspective, it makes no sense for a single man to maintain a 42-room mansion." "Why didn't you?" "Because some things have value beyond their economic utility." He looked around the library, his expression softening. "In a world increasingly dominated by efficiency and profit, we need spaces that exist simply because they're beautiful, because they remind us of what human hands and minds can create when not constrained by quarterly earnings reports." I thought about my business degree, about the years I'd spent studying profit margins and return on investment. None of my professors had ever spoken about the value of beauty or tradition or craftsmanship. Those things couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. "You see it, don't you?" Mr. Thornton asked, watching my face. "The potential here, not just to preserve the past, but to challenge how we think about value in the present." I nodded slowly. "A museum that's also a statement about what we choose to keep and why." "Exactly." His approval warmed something inside me that had been cold for a long time. "Now, one last thing before you go home to consider my offer." He led me through a door hidden behind a bookshelf, the reading nook I'd suspected existed but had never found, and up a narrow spiral staircase. We emerged onto the mansion's roof, a flat area surrounded by decorative parapets that I'd glimpsed from the ground but had never visited. The city spread out before us, a glittering tapestry of lights against the night sky. From this height, we could see for miles: the downtown skyline, the river winding through the valley, the neighborhood stretching toward the horizon. "This was my favorite spot," Mr. Thornton said, walking to the parapet. I used to come up here when I needed perspective, when the day-to-day concerns of business and family and the society seemed overwhelming. I joined him at the edge, feeling the cool night air against my face. It's beautiful. It is, but it's also a reminder. Everything you see out there, the buildings, the bridges, the roads, it all began as someone's idea, someone's vision of what could be. He turned to face me directly, his expression more earnest than I'd ever seen it. You've spent years taking care of what already exists, Maria. Perhaps it's time for you to build something of your own. In that moment, standing above the world with the folder containing my potential future clutched in my hands, I felt something shift inside me. The weight of expectations, my mother's, society's, even my own, seemed to lift, replaced by a lightness I hadn't felt since before my father's illness. I need to think about it, I said, though in my heart, I already knew my answer. Mr. Thornton nodded. Of course, take all the time you need. He glanced at his watch. I should let you get some rest. Tomorrow is still a workday after all. As we made our way back down through the house, I saw everything differently, not as rooms to be cleaned, but as spaces with histories and futures that might soon be partially mine to shape. The responsibility was enormous, but for the first time in years, I felt equal to a challenge. At my apartment door, Mr. Thornton paused. Whatever you decide, Maria, I want you to know that you've already given this house more than you realize. Your care has not gone unnoticed or unappreciated. I clutched the folder to my chest. Thank you for trusting me with this, with your legacy. Legacy, he repeated thoughtfully. An interesting word. We think it refers to what we leave behind, but perhaps it's really about who carries our work forward. He smiled slightly. Good night, Maria. Good night, Mr. Thornton. Once inside my apartment, I sat at my small kitchen table and opened the folder again, reading each page more carefully this time. The plan was brilliant in its detail. Educational programs for local schools, rotating exhibitions featuring works from Mr. Thornton's collection, partnerships with universities for art conservation studies. My role would be central to all of it, transforming me from housekeeper to executive director. Around midnight, my phone rang. Mom, probably calling to check why I hadn't returned her earlier call. I hesitated, then answered. Maria, are you all right? I called hours ago, she said, concern and slight annoyance mingling in her voice. I'm fine, Mom. I was out to dinner. On a Tuesday? With who? There was a pause. I almost heard her trying to process this information, to reconcile her image of her daughter, the overqualified housekeeper, with this new possibility. Well, she finally said, her voice softer now, that sounds like a real opportunity, Maria, a dignified position. I smiled to myself, thinking of Mr. Thornton's words on the roof. Perhaps it was time to build something of my own, not just a museum, but a life defined by my own sense of purpose rather than others' expectations. Yes, I agreed, looking out my window toward the magnificent house that had been my workplace for 7 years, and might soon become something more. In the morning, I would clean the mansion as usual, moving through its rooms with the same care I always had. But now, each room would hold not just its own history, but the promise of a future I never expected, one where dignified work wasn't defined by titles or degrees, but by purpose and passion and the courage to accept an opportunity when it appeared, even if it came from the most unexpected direction. I closed the folder and went to bed, dreaming not of the $20 million or the magnificent house, but of the possibilities that awaited me when I finally stepped into the role I'd been preparing for without even knowing it. Not just preserving beauty, but sharing it with the world.